All right. Good morning. It's a brand new day and still a little dark out there today. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'm not usually looking out the window, but hope you had a great night. And man, I had a good day yesterday. I had some good work done, and then hung out with a good friend of mine, just strategizing about doing some things with some of my writings, and then spent the evening with the Tampster, and just enjoyed the day. Man, it's good sometimes just to take a little break here and there and just enjoy. And so I hope you get to do that. And let's go ahead and jump into some truth, right? So we're in the book of Luke, chapter 6. And man, this is a monumental. I mean, all the scriptures are. It's kind of nebulous to say that, but they're all monumental. But this one is crucial. This is the choosing of the 12, and so you're familiar with them. You've seen a lot of them through the scriptures. We're familiar with several, but not all. And but it's important that we understand how foundational they are to everything. Without these 12, we have no church. The church is built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, and so we would have nothing if it weren't for that. And so this is God's chosen method, and we're going to look into that today and just see what takes place. So you'll remember that yesterday we left the Jesus had healed a man on the Sabbath, and they were just in fact, the verse says, but they themselves were filled with rage, with senseless rage, and began discussing together what they might do to Jesus, right? And so this is what's going on. Listen, literally that means the Pharisees lost their minds. That's what it means. Just like it just went out of their brain, I mean out of their head, and they couldn't even function. This is literally the force of what that means. They're irrational. They have no capacity at all to use their mind. And so they're just sheer emotion at this point, being led by sheer emotion, gone off the rails, whatever you would want to say, the loony bin, right? I mean, they have gone bizarre and berserk. And so that's where they are. And so what are they doing? They're beginning to discuss what they're going to do with Jesus. They're so enraged for several reasons. One, they believe they are the keepers of the faith, and they see him teaching and doing things contradictory to what they believe the faith was. And so that was one. Two, he was ripping away their respect, their authority, their power, and that no one's going to take that sitting down. And so this is who he is, and he's just annoying to them. And so it's at that backdrop that Luke says, now it was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray, right? So Jesus knows that he has just really stirred up the hornet's nest, so to speak, and he knows how it's going to end, right? So he knows that it will end in death. He knows this is the beginning of that, and so everything's turning. Nazareth had already turned against him. Now, in the region of Galilee, you've got this turmoil that's happening. He had already upset them in Jerusalem when he turned over the tables in the temple the first time he did that. So it's just sheer hatred, and everywhere he turns. But still, the crowds are swelling. I mean, they're getting bigger, and this is what we see take place. It says, so now it was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer with God. Now, Matthew records that 6 times Jesus went up to the mountain, right? And so, in fact, it looks as though this mountain is the one in which he will do the one of his sermons where he teaches the Beatitudes. And so he's on the mountain. He's gone up in this Galilean region. We don't know really what mountain. We just know that he's gone up, and he often would go there. He would often go to the mountains. There were a couple of times he went out into the wilderness to pray by himself, but there was a need for him to just get alone and commune with God, and to get away from all that was taking place. And I think we should take heed to that ourselves. It is good that you and I not be fully engaged at all time with everything happening in the world. Maybe you should turn off that TV. Maybe you should quit watching your your Netflix and all of those things. And maybe there's a disengagement where you're not just doing an activity, you're just retreating to actually think, to begin to pray, just to seek God's face. And so here is this picture of great hostility where he was, leaving that, heading to the mountain. And he doesn't go take a nap. He's all night he's up. All night he's up communing with God the Father. So here you have this holy Godhead 3-in-1 council that's taking place. Jesus interested to do only what the Father wants. And you remember he had laid aside his godly attributes, and so there was that listening to the Father, right? He had submitted himself to God the Father. And so he only did what the Father tells him, right? You remember all of these as we journey through the scriptures. And so this is where it is. So then it says, and when day came, he called his disciples to him. Now, we always tend to think of his disciples as the 12, but his disciples is anyone who was a learner. That's what that word means, mathetes. It means a learner, a student. And so he had tons of those. He had multitudes of those, the scriptures would tell us. Beyond the 120, but beyond the 12, and then his mother and the Marys that were with him, and Martha and Lazarus and all of those others. Besides all of them, there were those that he had healed. There were those that were hungry and he had fed. There were all of those. He's got thousands of groupies that are just kind of following him around. And so you see that through the scriptures. Now, in fact, it says there were large crowds of disciples. Verse 17 is going to tell us that when we get down there. It says, and then Jesus came down and stood them on a level place, and there was a large crowd of disciples and a great multitude of the people from all Judea and Jerusalem and the coastal region of Tyre and Sidon. So not all of those were disciples. Some were just there out of curiosity, but there were hundreds, it says, a large crowd of his disciples. Now, in John 6, when he fed the 5,000, and then he got in a boat, went across, walked on water, the next morning, the crowd followed him, and they're referred to as disciples. That's when Jesus says, man, you only came over here to get your bellies filled again. And then he says, if you want to know what you really need, it is to be consumed with me. And he uses the phrase, you need to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And it says, many of his disciples no longer walked with him. So disciple simply means a learner. Now, he's taking the disciple, he is coming down the mountain. The disciples have been coming up to that. And it says, let's get back to it in 12. It says, when day came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them. So the disciples now have come up to the mountain, and so he chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. Now, that's a powerful phrase. I just want to take a little bit of time today and talk about that. So the term apostle means sent one. And they would have used something similar to that. The rabbis would have had some similar to that. They are the ones who would be the representative of the rabbi. But the title here is vastly superior to that. It's above that. These 12 are significant, not just in this life, but in the one to come. You hear today men who want to call themselves apostles, and they put that title above them. Men love titles. They love to be called, whatever they are, pastor, bishop, apostle, super saint, whatever they call them, right? And listen, there are no apostles today in the sense of an office. In fact, Paul spoke of himself as an apostle and explains what the signs were of an apostle. And so this is why this is important. But listen, these are the sent ones. Jesus is going to take 12 men that the world really doesn't even, they find insignificant. They're going to find them kind of like the dumbest of the dumb, right? They're the untrained, the unlearned ones, people of no account. That's how they're referred to. And he will literally change the world with these 12. It's just powerful to me, the thoughts of all of those things. Now, when you get to heaven, should you have repented of your sins and you have cried out to him for forgiveness, and he has given you that, and you've been transferred from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light, and you are now at peace with God, adopted by him, lavished grace and love on you, and that you have been given the Holy Spirit as a down payment of the inheritance that is to come. Those of us who have done that, when we make our way toward that heavenly city, there will be 12 gates. At those 12 gates will be the 12 names of the tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Israel. Also at that gate will be the names of the 12 apostles. And so they will forevermore be etched into the gates of the heavenly city. So this is who they are, right? I just think it's important that we know that. They are the ones who will rule in eternity. We rule and reign with them, but really kind of in a sense under them, right? So they are the ones who will rule the new kingdom that is to come. That's who does that. And so it's important that it's easy to diminish the apostles because, yeah, they were kind of foolish, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But it's important to see that what God turned them into were mighty, mighty men, unrecognized by the world, but they had the authority of Jesus himself. Therefore, they had authority to cast out demons. They had authority to heal. They had authority to do miracles. They had authority, and it was demonstrated in this life as a demonstration that they truly are the sent ones from God Most High. They had power, right? They had a message. They had his message. That's what they preached, right? So Ephesians, and it's one of my favorite books. They come up so often in the book of Ephesians. They are the foundation of the church. That is the foundation of which he builds his church, right? It is the truth displayed within these apostles that become the foundation of building the church. They're the bones that give this structure of the church a solid foundation. And so Jesus being the chief cornerstone of that. The Spirit gave to them the mystery of Christ, right? That was given to them. Ephesians tells me that also, that to them was given the mysteries of Christ. So they unlocked, when Jesus breathed on them and they received the Spirit, and he unlocked their ability to understand the Scriptures, they received a knowledge of the Logos, a rhema of the Logos. And so they knew the mysteries of Christ. Suddenly, it was as though they could see Christ in every verse of the Old Testament and how it fit in with the New. And so you can hear and you can see that in some of the writings that they do. They were also the source of what you and I learn, right? What was it that they did, the disciples of Jesus, after Pentecost, and those who repented of their sins, and the Lord added daily to those that were being saved, 3,000 at the very beginning. What did it say they did? And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the breaking of bread, to fellowship, and to prayer. But what was it that they devoted themselves to? The apostles' teaching. Not just the Old Testament text, but the apostles' teaching from that text and from how Jesus had explained it to them. And so this is what they're doing. They built the church, they grew it, and it was strengthened by them, the book of Ephesians says. And then Corinthians, Paul writes that they did signs and wonders and miracles, because he says, did I not perform the same signs as the apostles? I'm an apostle, one untimely born. But he said, I had the same thing that they did. And he lists those out. Signs, wonders, and miracles. So these guys were slow, though, to understand, right? They didn't just wake up having had that title apostle, and all of a sudden they had their act together. You and I know that, right? They were a little self-absorbed. Do you remember? They're walking along and they're saying, they're having this conversation. Who's the greatest in the kingdom, right? That's a little self-absorbed, right? Who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? Which one's it going to be? Is it Peter? No, no, not Peter. right? Was it going to be John? No, man, he's so angry, right? Simon the Zealot? No way, right? And so they're having these conversations. So much so that James and John get their mom involved so that she goes, hey, Jesus, when you come in your kingdom, I'd really like for my sons to sit at one on your right, one on your left, right? And so there's this self-absorption that comes around. They didn't have great faith early on, right? I mean, they were like, man, Jesus left, and they're trying to cast out demons, and this guy who was being tossed into the fire, they were trying to deliver him, and they couldn't. Jesus comes down, and the dad's like, hey, man, your disciples couldn't fix my son. Can you, right? And they ask him, why couldn't we? And he said, oh, ye have little faith, right? So there's this, they lacked faith to believe. Thomas, even after the resurrection, unless I see the nail prints, I will not believe, right? So they didn't have great faith. The world didn't see them really as bright people. They were untrained, unlearned nobodies. We mentioned that. Now, this is who they were. Now, let's just read the text, verse 13. It says, and when day came, he called the disciples to him, and he chose 12 of them. This is who they are. Simon, who's also named Peter. So that's the first one out of the gate that he names, Peter. Peter's brother Andrew. Andrew, you remember, was one of the disciples of John early on. And John says, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And Andrew followed him. So he's hanging out by the gate, so to speak. Jesus comes by. He's a follower of John the Baptist, and he hears that that's the Messiah. So he takes off. Then he runs and tells Peter, and then they get James and John involved. There's Nathaniel, right? We see all of those. And here he gives the list of them. So there's Simon Peter and his brother Andrew, James and John. Now those are all the fishing empire, right? Those are the ones who left recently to follow him. Peter, Peter and Andrew, James and John, they were partners in a fishing enterprise. Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew, which we know to be the tax collector that he called in, Thomas, which we know him to be the doubting one, James, the son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot. So we know he was like in the political scene. He was one of the rabble rousers. He was the one that was seeking to overthrow Rome. So this is who he's gathered together. Judas, the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, the traitor, right? Who became a traitor. Now, that's the 12 apostles. And we'll see them kind of unfold throughout the rest of the book. But this is who they are. Now, it says, verse 17, and we'll just take this because it leads us into tomorrow where we jump into kind of the Sermon on the Mount. It says, and then Jesus came down with them. So they kind of meet him at the mountain. Then he comes down to a lower level of this mountain and on a level place. And there was a large crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of the people from all Judea, Jerusalem, and the coastal region of Tyre and Sidon. So people have come up from the south, right? Judah, Jerusalem. They've come up from there. They're somewhere in the region of Galilee. And so, and Tyre and Sidon were near the west. And so you've just got this conglomeration of people from really the whole land of Israel. And they've come. And it says this, who had come to hear him and to be healed by his diseases. So they're in a sense disciples, right? Large crowd of disciples, other multitudes. You got the curious, you got those who are going, no, I want to learn from him. I'm not just here for the show. I want to grow. I want to know. He's got something nobody else has. So you got this mixture of that. And so they were coming to him to hear him. That would be his disciples, or the disciples, not just the 12, but the disciples, and to be healed by his disease. So there were some who just wanted the effects of what he could do, heal diseases. Now listen. And those who were troubled by unclean spirits were being cured, right? So here's what's going. Jesus comes down. He's got his 12 with him. And then there's the crowd that follows. And it says that there were those whose diseases were healed, who were cured and cleaned of demonic spirits. And it says this, verse 19, and all the people who were trying to touch him, because power was coming from him and healing them all. He was at this point, having spent all night in prayer, having gathered his 12, He is overwhelmed with the power of God on Most High, and it is emanating from him, so that all who just were trying to touch him, didn't even say touch, those who were trying to touch him, they were being healed. They were being delivered from the demonic realm. And such is the power of the Christ who lives in you. Man, we're going to look in at his teachings, what it was that he was teaching them. What were the disciples learning? We're going to look at that in the morning. Man, Lord bless you guys. Can't wait to share more of it with you then.